The flagship Nothing Phone 3 has officially landed, and with it, Nothing's and CMF's entire 2025 lineup is finally complete. A lineup of 4 phones that we're gonna put through their paces in this camera comparison to really see if Nothing's first flagship is actually something you should consider snatching, despite its looks. But to spice this video up even more, we're going to be showcasing the HOVERAir X1 PROMAX to show you just how much you can elevate your shots and videos in a way not even any of these guys can. Hey, I'm Olive, your host here at Versus.com, and a thanks to HOVERAir for sponsoring this video. For our camera comparisons, we always award points with the maximum number depending on the number of devices in the test. Since here we have 4 devices, the maximum score for each category is of course 4. We'd also like to add that we always evaluate all of our photos and videos using a calibrated monitor. Alright, let's head out and test these guys, and along the way we will show you how easy and fun the HOVERAir X1 PROMAX is to use. All you have to do is fold out this guy over here, press this button, and it will go into automatic flight mode. You don't even need a controller or your phone. Pretty neat. So you can still capture professional looking shots whilst living in the moment. Anyway, let's start off with standard wide photos, as we feel that's the mode people use most frequently. Here, all phones are rocking 50 megapixel cameras. However, the Nothing Phone 3 actually boasts a bigger aperture and sensor size, while all the rest share pretty much the same camera specs. In this very first outdoor shot, we can see the photos from all the phones aren't super different. Only the Phone 3a Pro stands out with a bit less saturation in the grass, but honestly, all the photos are looking good. Here though, both 3a phones make my hair look a little bit brownish, which isn't quite right. Interestingly, the Phone 3 and CMF look more natural. The CMF looks a little over-sharpened though, while the Phone 3 delivers better background blur thanks to that bigger sensor. In interior shots, however, the CMF can't really capture that bright lamp at the top without blowing it out, while all the others manage it just fine. But the Phone 3 is the only one that gets the colors correctly, as Ezzy's t-shirt was definitely green, not brown like on all the other photos. So now let's move on to a few ultra-wide examples. Ultra-wide is a great mode for capturing more of the scenery in your photos. Here we've got another 50 megapixel camera on the Nothing Phone 3, but rather small 8 megapixel cams on all the others. All phones have the same aperture, but for sensor size, the Phone 3 definitely packs the largest one. Interestingly though, on paper, it also has the most restrained field of view compared to the others. In practice, however, all photos have pretty much the same field of view. This time, the whole Nothing family looks practically identical. CMF, on the other hand, has this weird highlight reduction on whites and also makes the bench look a bit magenta. In this next set, that small 8 megapixel camera on the Phone 3a Pro, 3a, and CMF really shows its limitations. All photos are pretty blurry and have a lot of noise, even though it's a daytime shot. The Phone 3 definitely looks sharper, all thanks to that new 50 megapixel shooter. Indoors though, the tables completely turn. The Nothing Phone 3 and CMF are the ones with wrong colors, even though they were the most precise just before. Both Phone 3a brothers look more authentic, but that saturation and exposure are a bit too high for our liking. So now let's move on to a few portrait examples. I love portrait mode, it's one of my favorites. Let's see which one of these can give us the most professional looking results and the most accurate edge detection. With the main camera, the edge detection on both the 3a phones plus the CMF really have a tough time with hair. The Phone 3 definitely improves in this department, doing a much better job. However, just like all the rest, it slipped up in this one spot right here. Now, when we switch to the telephoto lenses, that's where we see just how much the edge detection in the Phone 3 has really improved compared to the others. It actually detects every single stray hair, plus that bokeh looks super nice. So of course, great video quality is absolutely critical when it comes to your smartphones, and although these bad boys can shoot in 4K, the HOVERAir X1 PROMAX can shoot in 8K, which is pretty neat. It can also shoot in horizontal, and then you can convert that later to vertical for different platforms, which is pretty nice. Anyway, let's move on to a few video examples. So as mentioned with the main camera, all phones can shoot in 4K, but the Nothing Phone 3 can film at 60 FPS while the rest are capped at 30 FPS. As always, for our comparisons though, we stick to 4K 30 FPS. Outdoors, we have to say the Phone 3A's and the CMF's forte is definitely not video, as both have extremely bad stabilization, basically ruining the footage. The Phone 3A Pro is better, but there's still a bit of lens shake going on. The Phone 3 definitely has the best dynamic range and stabilization, but it could use a little more sharpness. Indoors, it's pretty much the same story with that heavy lens shake on the 3A and CMF. Seriously, why has Nothing not tried to fix that by now? As before, the 3A Pro looks a bit better, but the Phone 3 once again is the most color correct and stable. However, as we said, sharpness could definitely improve. Just as a note though, none of these phones offer a dedicated portrait video mode, so if you're looking to film some cinematic videos with nice background blur, well, there's nothing for you here. Anyway, let's switch to ultra-wide video. Here, the Nothing Phone 3 can push up to 4K 60 FPS resolution, while the rest are limited to 1080p 30 FPS. But once again, we do stick to 4K 30 FPS when possible for our comparisons. Now, nothing personal, but here no video is particularly good. The CMF looks straight up bad, while both 3A phones are heavily over-sharpened. The Nothing Phone 3 is the only salvageable one, but even its detail could still improve a bit, which could be done with a software update, but let's see if that ever happens. Indoors, just like before, the Phone 3 and CMF look a bit too cold, with the Phone 3 making me look super pale. The 3A brothers do have better colors, but the saturation is a bit overdone. That said, the Phone 3 is definitely the sharper option, so you could probably just fix up the white balance in post-production. Alright, it is now time to test out stabilization on these devices, and of course, our drone friend over here can also produce great stabilized footage thanks to its 2-axis gimbal, electronic image stabilization, and horizon leveling. As we saw before, both the Phone 3A and CMF are just terrible when it comes to stabilization. Honestly, that pulsating jelly-like effect is just a hot mess. The Phone 3A Pro is a bit more stable, but there's still a hint of that weird jiggle going on. The Phone 3, however, has nothing of that. And here, that hot mess we just saw turns into a full-blown dumpster fire because once again, the Phone 3A and CMF are just twerking all over the place. The Phone 3A Pro again does a better job, but it's not like it's leagues ahead. The Phone 3 is definitely the best among these, but we still think it could improve even further with a dedicated action mode. It's time to test out the front camera, which means it's selfie time. So I'm gonna be taking some selfies, and I'm also gonna test out video and audio while I'm at it. On this side, we've got 50 megapixel cameras on the Nothing Phone 3 and 3A Pro, a 32 megapixel camera on the 3A, and a 16 megapixel camera on the CMF Phone 2 Pro. The aperture is the same across the Phone 3, 3A Pro, and 3A, but only the Phone 3 and 3A Pro share the largest sensor among all these devices. The CMF, while not terrible, smoothens my face way too much, making me look like a plastic doll. And while all the Nothing phones look almost identical, the 3A Pro has the most natural background blur, giving it more of a professional camera vibe. In Lowlight, the CMF definitely loses the most detail, plus it gives me a very magenta tint. Again, all the Nothing phones look pretty much the same here, but both 3A phones could use a bit more detail, while the Phone 3 is over-sharpened. So a middle ground would have been perfect. For front camera video formats, the Nothing Phone 3 can film up to 4K 60 FPS, the 3A Pro up to 4K 30 FPS, while the 3A and CMF are capped at 1080p 30 FPS. Once again, we see some strange inconsistencies between these phones. Even though all lack autofocus, the 3A Pro is way too blurry, the CMF is a bit sharper, while the 3A goes to the other extreme and looks super over-sharpened and contrasty. The Phone 3 has the most natural detail, but it suffers from a heavy magenta tint. So now let's test out the audio on all of these devices. We're gonna start off with the brand new Nothing Phone 3. How do I sound over here? Is it any good? Moving on to the Nothing Phone 3A Pro. Is it any better than the Phone 3? What do we think? How do I sound? And then we're moving on to the Nothing Phone 3. I'm in a relatively busy area. There's some cars, people walking around. How's it handling that? finally, we've got the CMF Phone 2 Pro. Is it any better than the rest? As always, let's discuss it and talk about it. As you've heard, the CMF's recorded audio quality is just too low. Interestingly, the so-called flagship Phone 3, while it sounds clear, lets all the background noise slip right in. Both the 3A Pro and the 3A do cancel more background noise, but the sound is a bit muffled. Now it is time for zoom, and even though these phones have dedicated zoom lenses, the HOVERAir X1 PROMAX can get up super high and super close to things to capture some really sharp shots. Here we've got 50 megapixel shooters on all phones. The Nothing Phone 3 and 3A Pro boast 3 times optical zoom, while the 3A and CMF Phone 2 Pro have 2 times optical zoom. Interestingly though, the CMF has the biggest aperture and the 3A Pro packs the biggest sensor. This is how all these telephoto cameras compare at their optical zoom levels. You'll notice the Phone 3A and CMF look a bit overexposed. At 5 times zoom, all the Nothing phones look pretty good, whereas the CMF already starts to lose quality. At 10 times zoom, the CMF looks straight up rough, while the Phone 3 keeps the most detail and captures more shadow detail. At 20 times zoom, this is even more evident, with the Phone 3 once again capturing more in those darker areas. At the maximum zoom levels, while both the Phone 3 and 3A Pro can zoom at up to 60 times, the Phone 3 evidently uses AI to deliver a far sharper shot, making it your best bet if you're planning on playing spy, though we heavily discourage doing so as it can be dangerous. Slow-mo is not a necessity to have on your smartphones, but it's definitely a useful feature, so let's put them to the test and see which one gives us the smoothest results. For this mode, basically all phones can film at a maximum of 1080p resolution. All of them can also film at 120 FPS, but only the Nothing Phone 3 can push it to 240 FPS. As you can see, the CMF really overbrightens the image. The Phone 3A Pro and 3A have a bit better dynamic range, but they're overly contrasty and over-sharpened. Only the Phone 3 looks rather decent here, and that slower recording speed of 240 FPS of course gives it the edge over the rest. So now it's time to get up close and personal and capture some macro shots. This was quite surprising because at a short distance, only the cheap CMF and the top-of-the-line Phone 3 can actually shoot macro photos. Both 3A models are missing out on this feature, and while the Phone 3 photo is way sharper, the CMF's photo is more color correct. Switching to telemacro, once again the Phone 3 and CMF are the only ones capable of capturing shots at this super short distance. Both 3A phones need way more room from your subject to focus properly. Once again, the Phone 3's photo is sharper, while the CMF's colors are just more natural. And finally, let's take a look at a few low-light examples to see how each one of these devices handles darker conditions. Here we can actually see just how different the post-processing of these phones from the same brand is, contrary to what we saw at the very beginning of the video. The Phone 3A and CMF captured the least detail and have incorrect white balance. The Phone 3 is sharp, but the 3A Pro is the most color correct, also offering a good amount of detail. Now, ultra-wide is definitely all of these guys' weakest points, as all photos are extremely over-brightened, and none really capture that true low-light vibe. If anything, the Phone 3 manages to gather a little more detail, but it's a tough category for sure. Switching modes to portrait, the Phone 3 and 3A have a rather incorrect cold white balance. Meanwhile, the Phone 3A Pro and CMF look more true to life, with the 3A Pro also looking sharper. However, for edge detection, the Phone 3 is just excellent. It's a real shame about those colors though. With the telephoto lenses, color-wise, it's the same story here, with the Phone 3A Pro and CMF capturing more natural colors. However, the Phone 3, even though not perfect, definitely captures the sharper shot. And now for video with the main lens, once again, we get wild results with no phone being perfect. The CMF is heavily desaturated, the Phone 3A absolutely crushes the blacks, the 3A Pro is oversaturated, though color correct, and while the Phone 3 overcorrects its white balance, it's definitely the sharpest video of the bunch. Switching to ultra-wide video, both 3A phones are just absolutely dark, which is interesting because the cheaper CMF actually gathers more detail. And once again, while not perfect, the Phone 3 is by far the best in dark conditions, perfect for busting ghosts. Alright, now let's do a quick summary and see who the winner is. Our scoring system is based on order of importance, giving higher percentages to more popular categories like wide, ultra-wide, portrait, and video, while assigning lower percentages to less popular categories such as audio, zoom, slow motion, and macro. For example, in photos taken with the wide lens, the Nothing Phone 3 scored 12 general points, with 20% of this equaling 2.4 final points, and so on with the next phones and categories. So, after taking a deep dive into all the categories and tallying up every single point, we can clearly see that the Nothing Phone 3 dominated almost every category, with the exception of audio, which both the Nothing Phone 3A Pro and 3A took, and macro, where it tied with the CMF Phone 2 Pro, making the Nothing Phone 3 the undisputed winner of this camera comparison. Now, yes, it might not come as a huge surprise that the flagship won, but what truly surprised us, and something you could see too, is that Nothing's photo and video post-processing can wildly differ from one phone to another. It really doesn't offer the kind of consistency across all models that you can expect from other established brands like Apple or Google, who also offer both flagships and more budget-friendly phones. And while the Nothing Phone 3 is the winner of this camera comparison, honestly, we're not sure it can go head-to-head with other true flagships out there just yet. But we're curious to know what you think about Nothing's 2025 lineup, and if you have any personal experience with any of these devices, definitely drop your thoughts in the comments below. Oh, and if you want to check out how both of the cheapest models in this comparison stack up in a full review, make sure to check this link right here. And don't forget to check out the super cool HOVERAir X1 PROMAX in the description below. And before you go to a Coldplay concert, make sure to leave a big thumbs up and make sure to subscribe, as we are always testing new devices to help you make the best choice. We'll see you in our next video, and until then, take care.